You're watching Liquid Lunch on Newsmax TV, and it is Money Monday. Your money is not doing fantastic, although the Dow is recovering just a bit, down 330 as we speak. It was down more than 400 today, so there's a little bit of a recovery. We'll keep you posted on that. But things are happening all around our country that are totally out of control. And one of them is the crisis in Flint, Michigan, where these people were being poisoned for years and years. And the lead counsel in the Flint, Michigan water case, Corey Stern, joins us now to talk about that a little more. Corey, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what is happening here? Why can't these people get justice?
So Flint, the crisis really began in 2016, and because the primary defendants in the case are the state of Michigan and Michigan employees, they have protections that you and I don't have under the Constitution of the United States because they're government officers. And as a country, we want our government officers to be doing the work of the government and not be mired in lawsuits. So the first 4 years of this litigation has essentially been a fight over whether those individuals and entities within the government in the state of Michigan could be held accountable. The Supreme Court just recently decided not to rule on an appeal that was brought from the United States Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, essentially upholding what the Sixth Circuit found, which was that these individuals and entities could in fact be held liable. So now finally, the case is proceeding toward a trial in light of the fact that these officials are able to be held in the case.
So are you saying somehow or another, if you're a government official, you can act in an arbitrary and capricious way and still have no legal liability? Like, there's got to be proof here, and I've read on this case that there's a whole bunch of stuff that the government officials knew what was happening, but they didn't do anything about it.
It's not so much that knowing matters, it's that if the standard for you or I is here, the standard for a government official or entity is here, because we want our government officials and our entities doing the work of the government. What the courts have found thus far in Flint is that the conduct of the government officials has risen to a high enough level where, despite the fact that the bar is higher than it would be for you and for me, it is high enough for us to proceed against them. But in many instances, government officials, despite what they may or may not have done, are let out of cases because their conduct just doesn't rise to that level. So
do they, we've all seen, these little snippets of people lighting their water on fire and stuff, but what are the real, down and dirty, what are the real effects that you've seen firsthand as the lead counsel in this thing?
So I personally represent 2,500 plus children individually. And so lead is toxic, especially for kids that are under the age of 6 years old. And so what lead does is it effectively brain poisons children. You can imagine if everyone's brain is like a forest, what lead poisoning does is it like burns a strip through a child's brain, and it makes it much more difficult for a child to learn. What it really does is it takes away a kid's potential. So you see now a generation of kids in Flint who were affected by this crisis, who may have been 4, 5, 6 years old at the time, who are now 9, 10, 11 years old. They don't function as well in school. They have cognitive deficits. They are more inclined to get left back. It's far more likely that they're not going to graduate from high school. It makes them far less employable, which makes crime rates likely to be higher in an environment where folks just don't have the capacity to get the education and therefore the jobs that they otherwise might have had this not have occurred.
I'm wondering, Corey, if I can ask you to just reiterate, given what the Supreme Court has done, what the legal options are at this point for the affected residents of Flint. Where do they go from here in light of what the Supreme Court has said?
So many of the residents in Flint have already filed lawsuits against the government as well as private entities. And what happened was, anytime you file a lawsuit, you have the trial court level. Here, the trial court, the federal court, said, yes, these cases can proceed. Because it's the government, they had an immediate right to appeal that decision to the United States Circuit Court for the Sixth Circuit. The Sixth Circuit took some time, but ultimately agreed with the lower court and said, yes, these cases can proceed. Once that decision came down, the government appealed to the United States Supreme Court, which just last week indicated, in fact, said that it would not take the case, effectively upholding what the Sixth Circuit said.
Gotcha. And finally, there's no doubt in your mind that this was an entirely preventable tragedy, what happened in Flint, is there?
I've never been more certain of anything in my life that this tragedy could have been prevented.
And we got to pick your brain in the final 30 seconds we have on the situation that we broke at the top of the show, which is U.S. Attorney's Office here in New York wants to speak with Prince Andrew about the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. Do you think they're looking at him as a potential target? If not, what do they want to talk to him about?
if I were the prince, I would be extremely concerned. It appears that presently the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, they're taking aim at anybody that they can in light of the fact that Mr. Epstein is no longer on this earth to face the charges that he would have faced. And because justice likely wasn't done many, many years ago in Florida when this information first came to light to the government officials, it seems like they'll go to no end to try and hold him accountable, even posthumously.
So I have a feeling that Prince Andrew is not going to be visiting the U.S. anytime soon.
He may not stay. He may not stay where he is anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, you keep us posted on what's happening in the case. If there's anything we can do to bring some awareness and advocacy on your behalf, we sure will, because those people got a raw deal as far as I'm concerned. You, on the other hand, are not getting a raw deal because you're getting 2 hours of unmitigated liquid lunch for a Money Monday, and we're going to come back right after this with some live impeachment coverage, and then Frankie and I will wrap it up with the WTF. What's the facts? Where Frankie corrects all the mistakes I made in today's show. Corey Stern, thank you very much. Thank you. Stay right there, but coming back with more liquid lunch to wrap it up right after this.